everyone, and welcome to today's edition of The Take. Today is a little bit different because not only have you got me, but you also have my colleague, my principal talent partner, Yasmin Mosen, who is joining me today. So really excited to have her on board. So I'm going to do a little bit of high level, and then I'm going to throw to Yaz to have a little bit of a chat about the market at certain levels and talk through a little bit in terms of what we're seeing from an industry perspective as well. So to just remind everyone, there is an opportunity to pop your questions in the chat. We've already got a few more in there because obviously people can pop those in prior to the registration. So please pop those questions in there. I know that there's quite a few ones specifically around salaries and things like that. So please just pop those through and we'll go through and have a look and answer those. So in terms of where we're at right now, so, we've had the budget come out. There's still a lot happening in terms of what's going on geopolitically at the moment. I would say that hiring is probably starting to see a little bit of a slowdown, and that's obviously being recognised in the numbers that came out in terms of the unemployment stats yesterday. Obviously, that's a lagging indicator, so there were no major surprises for ourselves because we're obviously seeing this at the coalface. So that impact is probably, unfortunately, not even showing what's happened, obviously, in the Middle East as well because of those lagging numbers. So I would say right now is really that sub 200K market where we're seeing really all of the activity. And if you break that down even further, it really is more at that advisor, BP level. It's the heavy lifting, so no surprises there. Where we are seeing investment across the board at the moment is really around things like operating model redesigns, transformation, workplace relations, compliance, etc. It's just non-stop. So it feels like it's a very busy market for HR at the moment. I'd say they're dealing with a lot. There's a lot going on, and obviously there's lots of questions around things like AI and technology and all those sorts of things. There's a hell of a lot happening at sort of, I guess, that high level from a macroeconomic perspective across the board, and also, politically, geopolitically, there's still a lot going on. I think what we'll probably find here in Victoria is, depending on how things go with the election in November, that will also have an impact on certain industries, whether they will grow or shrink. We've also got, the issue of mandating 2 days working from home, which obviously the current government are talking through that they will mandate if they do get elected. So that's going to play out and be very, very interesting in terms of that impact. So I might just throw to Yaz to talk through what's happening in the markets there. And before we do that, I'm just going to get her to introduce herself because you probably picked up she has a slightly different accent to me. So I will throw to Yaz to do a bit of an intro.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah. So I'm Yasmin. I'm one of the principal talent partners here at Donegan, and I primarily support the senior market. And just a little bit more about me. So as Sarah mentioned, you might have noticed my accent. I am from America. So I moved from the US, I want to say about 2 years ago now. So coming up on my 2-year anniversary in Australia. And a little bit more, so I come from an HR recruitment background, although this is my first job in Australia, so it's definitely been a steep learning curve, but an awesome ride, and just truly appreciate how amazing the team has been, how amazing Sarah has been with getting me up to speed. And on a personal note, I'm a mom, so I have a little rambunctious 2-year-old, and he definitely keeps life interesting. So that's just a little bit more about me, and I'm really excited to be here joining The Take alongside Sarah today, and excited to share more about what's happening in both the mid-market as well as the senior market. And so, shared a little bit more about the forces at play, what's happening geopolitically, the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. And I think as far as, how that's trickling into hiring, totally it's slowing down processes. I'm constantly hearing from the candidate side of things, it's a really, really tricky market to navigate right now. And so, hearing constantly processes getting paused midway, roles getting reshaped in the middle of the process or pulled all together. And so definitely want to just name from the onset, I know it's a really challenging market for candidates, and definitely feeling that, uncertainty kind of across the board there. just zooming in on the mid-market, a couple of things that I'll share. I think the true generalists are in strong demand right now. And so a couple of things that I mentioned, I'd say the generalists with the ER capability, they're really standing out in this current market. Those folks that are the good blend of, strategy and hands-on delivery, that is definitely in strong demand right now. And I'll say kind of on the opposite side of things, those COE roles, so the L&D, OD, talent acquisition, not as many of those roles on the market at the moment, though we do expect that to change in the new financial year. And then going into the senior market, a couple of things that I would name, I'd say, the hiring is happening. I would say it's steady, but it's cautious. And I'd say particularly, we're seeing roles around the 200 to 250K mark. But I think, hiring managers are being incredibly selective about what they're looking for. We get really, really specific briefs. And so I think that's, due to a combination of things. But, the other thing I'll name is there's a lot of really solid candidates that are active and on the market right now. And the number of roles don't match up with the number of candidates who are actively searching. And so definitely want to share more about the candidates who are getting traction in this current market. But just wanted to name that. I will say, just as far as where the green shoots are right now, the industries where I think there's a lot of opportunities, where it's fast and evolving, I would say care in general.
100%.
So
healthcare,
aged care, healthcare, childcare as well. That's definitely a fast and evolving space. And then in Melbourne in particular, I'd say commercial construction and infrastructure. That's a very, fast and evolving space. And then I'd also mention renewable energy.
Absolutely, yes.
Big investment with that transition in Melbourne. So those are some of the industries I'd name, but anything else you'd want to add?
I think, no, absolutely. And the layer I would put to that is we're still seeing that growth across that small to medium enterprise. So that 500 to 5,000, that's really where the growth is. I think it's a more challenging environment for large listed companies that are extremely large. If you think of like the banking sector, for example, they're under cost pressures to, have their share price going up, and every listed company is under pressure in that regard. But, they're the sort of businesses that are probably leaning quite heavily into AI. If you think about some of those sectors we've talked about, energy, healthcare, infrastructure, etc., they're really hard to outsource and offshore. You can't just take that type of job and, just get sort of like, someone, AI to do it for you. Whereas I think some of those, those sectors that are becoming more probably a little bit more prevalent to being impacted by AI. And as we know, it's that knowledge workforce. So again, it's that sort of very professional services, consulting, all that kind of stuff. So we're probably seeing a lot of organizations probably recalibrate like what their offering is as well. We've seen that across the tech sector, particularly. AI is kind of cannibalizing, what they do now. That's basically cutting, a lot of their markets. So I think we'll start to see the exciting thing is that we're going to see new sectors emerge. Absolutely. Tech wasn't even a sector 20 years ago. It just didn't exist. So I think we're going to see on the flip side, we will definitely see new roles get created. I know that's hard to imagine right now because they're kind of thinking, oh, it's going to take roles, but I do really think it's going to create new roles and opportunities. So that's probably the really interesting piece at the moment. But just to touch on what Yaz was talking about, and certainly we know in terms of like the, I'd say definitely the senior market at the moment, and that's really sort of anything above that, 180, 200, it is a bit of a challenging market. There's more supply than there is demand at the moment. Organizations are being really cautious. When you're investing in a role at 200, 300, 400, 500K, they really want to see the ROI. They're not just going to willy-nilly, hire a bunch of people at that level. They want to see the results. So I think, what would be really interesting is to hear specifically from Yaz around, who are the people that are landing those roles and how are they landing and how can you stand out at the moment? And Yaz has got some really great insights. So I just wanted to throw it to you on that.
Of course, it's a really good question. And I'd say just zooming in on the mid-market in particular, I mentioned, those true generalists being in high demand right now. And I would say they're the folks that can straddle both the strategy and the hands-on delivery and, also have that really strong ER capability. I would say those are the folks that are sticking out to me right now. And then I would mention just on top of that, people that can operate in those leaner environments and navigate the uncertainty because so many organizations are going through change right now. I think the change, the fast-paced environment, those are the things to really speak to when you're having conversations with recruiters and hiring managers to differentiate yourself in this market. At the senior level, we're constantly hearing about commercial capability, commercial acumen.
Absolutely.
And I would say, I'll dig in just a little bit more about what that actually looks like on a CV, as well as how that comes up in conversations with recruiters and hiring managers. But I'd say alongside commercial capability, I would name, the change and transformation experience. That's a really sought after skill set right now. And then the executive level influence, so working with senior stakeholders, that is another really sought after skill set. So just digging into the commercial capability, and I'd say this comes up in the mid-market as well. A couple of things, hiring managers are looking for candidates who understand how their work connects back to the bottom line. And so it's not just about what you did, but it's about what actually changed because of your work. And so how that shows up in your CV, don't just list your key responsibilities, list your key achievements and actually quantify that with numerical metrics. So, risk reduced, cost saved, anything around engagement survey scores. Those are the kinds of metrics that hiring managers are really interested in. And it's going to pull you out as somebody who's commercial and understands how your work connects back to the bottom line. The other thing I'd say is beyond your CV, when you start to have those conversations with recruiters and with hiring managers, have a couple of key examples with metrics of how your work actually moved and created those positive outcomes for a business. That's going to be really important and will also be a great differentiator for you.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd add there?
Absolutely, yes, that's so true. I think, look, particularly in the market where, at that senior level, I think having your pitch is really, really important. You might only have 5 minutes to talk to the recruiter or the hiring manager, and you really need to be able to land why you're different. These days we know that a lot of stuff you don't even get a chance to talk to the hiring manager. So, if you do get that opportunity to have a chat, absolutely make sure you have your pitch, what you can deliver. Interestingly, we see thousands, millions of CVs, week on, week out. And I saw one CV that actually stopped me in my tracks, and it takes a lot for that to happen. And it was a CPO, and what she had done in each of her roles was she had quantified and articulated the commercial impact that she had and put a dollar figure against it. Now, that just made me go, whoa, I've actually never seen that before. And it was so, it stood out. It stood out. And, we live in a capitalist economy. The reality is organizations are looking for that ROI. You need to be able to tie whatever those initiatives are, you need to be able to tie that back to an investment. So, businesses can go, okay, well, if I'm paying $250,000 for that role, they're going to expect a certain amount of how many millions in terms of an impact. That's just how things work. So I think, really getting clear on your pitch, and absolutely, as Yaz was saying, really have those commercial outcomes that you can talk to. And, that is hard for HR because sometimes, not everything can be measured in a dollar, but sometimes there is, there's metrics, there's ways you can, get that language. And I think we're probably starting to see, in this new world that we're all kind of venturing into in terms of AI and things like that, you've got to be able to talk data. You just have to be able to articulate those outcomes, and you've got to be able to put some form of measure to it, because what's happening right now is that the heavy lifting and the manual processing side of things, which HR does have a lot of, that's going to be taken away. So really it's that, it's that value that you're adding beyond that transactional. So it's that really that advisory, that stuff that's really nuanced, things like that. Where can you bring that, expertise, and people can see that there's a reason why you're coming to the table. So I think also your point around influencing executives, such a critical part of what HR does. A lot of what HR does is having difficult conversations all the time, quite literally. And I think, where HR's at the moment is there's, I think it's really got to lean into some of those difficult conversations. And I think there's a lot happening from, operating model redesign, there's, technology implementations. I think we had this discussion this morning around the fact that right now, I think a lot of people are thinking that, I'm looking, the grass is always greener. I'm looking to make a move, and I'm constantly saying to people at all levels, everyone's going through change and transformation. Nobody's got it nailed. Everyone's having messy kind of situations at the moment. It's just a messy kind of a market, and that's not just the recruitment market, the labor market. It's just reflective of what's happening in organizations at the moment. If you look at what's happening from a world perspective, lots of noise, lots of mess, not a lot of clarity. that plays into what happens in workplaces. So that's, it's no surprises. So I would say that ability to deal with ambiguity is really important, and HR obviously always deals with the grey. That's pretty, standard, but right now that's really been dialed up a hell of a lot. So I think if you can get that across and definitely demonstrate that ability to deal with the ambiguity at all levels, we're not just talking senior, it's really important to learn that as an advisor as well as a BP, you've got to be able to do that. So we're hitting the halfway mark, which means we probably should turn our attention to some questions. So I know that there's quite a few there. So we might pick out, good question. What are you expecting to see in the market in the new financial year? Oh, look, good question. We're obviously coming to the end of the financial year. It's always an interesting time because what you traditionally will tend to find is that new budgets get released from the 1st of July across the board, generally speaking, particularly if you run to an Australian financial year. That means that things like pay rises and bonuses normally flow through to maybe the July kind of August period. Right now, I'd be surprised if anyone's getting a material uplift in their salary. I don't think organisations are shooting out the lights in any great respect in terms of bonuses and things like that. That normally leads to a little bit of movement, and what tends to happen is people generally tend to move when they get a bonus. They definitely want to move if they don't get a bonus. So we always find that there's a little bit of movement around that side of things. I think based on the federal budget, I think we're probably going to see more investment in the care economy, obviously, housing construction, things like that. I definitely think there's going to be more work coming out from those sectors, energy, etc., from that side of things. So again, I think that's still going to move through, but that's my take. It's a little bit of a crystal ball kind of situation because it really does depend on what's happening globally, if that makes sense. I think the more interesting thing will be what happens come election time in November, and how that'll play out as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So who knows?
So I'll take this one. This is, are organizations becoming more open to interim and project-based support? And I'd say absolutely, especially in this final quarter of the financial year. I'm seeing, businesses are being very strategic with their hiring decisions because they don't want to impact headcount, but they want to add capability to their team. And so, as far as how they're being strategic, they're asking themselves, what's the capability that my team needs right now or in the next 3 to 6 months? And I think this on-demand talent offering that we have, it's a really creative solution to be able to bring on capability to your team without adding to headcount. And so, just thinking about, what is it on my team that we need right now, whether it's change and transformation, payroll, people strategy, those shorter term projects that your team needs. The on-demand talent offering is a really creative way to add capability because, we have experts at the ready who can just come in and add value to your team right away. And so definitely wanted to make sure, I clearly named that. And we're definitely seeing a big rise in the temp and fixed term hiring, especially in this last quarter.
Absolutely. And I think because there's always critical things that need to be done, and particularly, payroll compliance. My goodness, the amount of work we've had in that space has been a lot. So there is always the demand in that space. And again, yes, we know a lot of organisations are reluctant to bring the permanent headcount on because of that reason. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. So I'm seeing a lot of questions around salary.
Always a hot topic. What are we seeing across salaries and benefits right now? Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting question. It fluctuates and changes depending on the market. So, what I'd say right now, interestingly, it's almost like perks, which used to be a really, really big thing. I feel like that's almost taken a bit of a backseat. Don't get me wrong, perks are important. I think what people are looking for now is stability. I think, stability because there is a lot of fluctuations in the market, and, if you're in the tech sector, a lot of people are very nervous about that sector at the moment. So I think depending where you sit and depending on whether you have a mortgage or school fees or whatever it might be, I think stability is a really key one. I think that's really important. Development is huge, career development. People, they don't just want, the fancy fruit basket or the gym membership or whatever it is, a lot of the data actually shows people actually really want development. Professional development, we actually literally were just catching up with a client yesterday and they were like, what we've identified is that, we keep hiring external talent to come into the business, and we've realized that, we haven't spent time, developing our own staff. So when it does come to things like promotions, they're not ready because we've been hiring external and we haven't done the work to do that. So, and I think, people are looking and going, okay, well, I really want to broaden out my toolkit. I want to get AI fluency. I want to get, data literacy or whatever it might be. So the professional development is actually probably, I think, one of the biggest things. People want to grow their career and they want to be able to do that in their current role. So, don't get me wrong, salary is obviously critically important, but it feels like we're in an environment where bonuses are not necessarily getting paid out at the moment. I mean, it really does depend how the business is performing. I think over probably the last 5 to 10 years, I do think organizations have made the barrier to achieve those bonuses a lot higher. So, whereas, 10 years ago, a good rating might have got you a 10% bonus. Now you need to be very good to even get, a 7% bonus type of thing. So there's definitely probably a little bit of some interesting dynamics, and which leads to probably my next point, that we actually have our salary survey open at the moment for this very reason, because we have our salary guide and lowdown coming out later this year, and we really want to capture what is happening. We hear and see it on a daily basis, so we have a pretty good gut feel in terms of what's happening and not happening, but we really need the data to back that up. So please contribute. It's completely confidential. We don't take any of your personal data. All we really want to know is just, did you get a pay rise? Are you expecting a pay rise? I think one of the key things is, we ask the question, which is my favorite right now, do you feel like you are doing more than you did last 12 months ago? Invariably, the answer is probably yes, but the kicker to that is, are you getting paid any more? And I think most of that would be no. So we're really trying to understand what's playing out there at the moment, and obviously different sectors pay differently and all that kind of stuff, but would love your contribution. It's going to be open till the 30th of June, so we've got a long lead time, and that'll help us inform obviously the lowdown, which comes out later this year.
Absolutely. And I think kind of just piggybacking off of your point, we're hearing, so this is one of the questions we got is, what's the biggest hiring disconnect that you're seeing right now? And I think it is around salary, right? It's that market alignment and the expectations that both candidates and clients have around salary as well as role scope. So true. That is just one of the biggest disconnects that we're hearing right now. And so it's one of the main drivers for this salary survey that we're launching. And, we want to collect as much data as possible to paint a really accurate picture of what's happening in this hiring landscape that is continuing to shift. And that data is going to allow us to put together a really comprehensive guide that we can share with candidates and with clients to just give them a broader overview of what's actually happening in the market right now. And so, another quick plug, it takes 2 minutes, it's fully anonymous, and it's open until June 30th. We would love for you to complete it. And if you do, you get first dibs on that lowdown that comes out in the spring.
Absolutely, yes. So please jump online and do that. That would be fantastic. I think we've got 5 minutes to go. So we're just saying we've got a few more here. I'm just thinking, interesting. Yeah, this is a good one. With so much change happening in the HR space from a legislative perspective, psychosocial safety to AI, how do you see HRBP roles changing to support this? Yeah, good question. I think, man, you got to feel for HR. I feel like it just every year it's just being thrown more and more things to worry about from that side of things. I do think, look, the good thing probably around things like AI is it is definitely taking some of the heavy lifting in terms of things like data analysis. And, again, I was chatting to a client the other week and they were just telling me that they, were using Claude to, undertake a bunch of analysis that would have taken him like 3 weeks to do. We could do it in a morning. So I think in an ideal world, I would like to think that we're going to see HR move more into that kind of true strategic advisory capacity, which is where it's always wanted to go with some of that heavy lifting. I think, to be honest, the way things are structured in Australia, we still have very complex legislation when it comes to things like industrial relations, etc. I can't see that changing anytime soon, and particularly with all the psychosocial stuff, which is just a whole nother layer of complexity. So I think in an ideal world, we'd like to see some of that transactional stuff be taken away, of course, but I think HR, it's certainly not going anywhere, put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my gut feel.
So I have a question that's specifically for me. And it's, what's the biggest difference in recruitment, HR, Australia compared to the US? And this is an interesting one. And I'm going to say, I'll preface this by saying, there's no right or wrong here. And I'm also going to really generalize. But from my seat on the bus, I would say a couple of things that stick out to me. Just from my experience, I think in Australia, hiring decisions, there's a lot more deliberation, and there's a little bit more caution. There's a bit more, it's more risk averse. Yeah. Whereas I think in the US, it's a little bit more gung ho. Let's just go for it. And so just a little bit more about what I mean there. I think, decisions around scale, growth, or investment in people, they're made quite quickly without a ton of steps in the process. Yeah. Whereas I think in Australia, there's a little bit more deliberation, really clear steps in a process, and a lot of thinking around the risk as well as longer term outcomes. I'd also say just with hiring decisions, I think in Australia, it's a little bit more, you want to make sure someone has that industry experience, or that they've done something really similar in their previous role. Whereas I think in the US, people are a little bit more open to the unconventional person who has that capability, or maybe even came from a different industry. So again, there's pros and cons, but that would be one thing. And the other thing I would mention is, I think Australia, it's a smaller market here. And so it's very relationship driven, and your reputation carries a lot of weight as well. And I think this is particular at the senior level where, people won't necessarily hire somebody at that, senior level if they're not known in their network, right? Or known to themselves. Whereas I think in the US, it's such a big market that you can't always rely on your network to do that.
So true. Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess that is the downside of being the smaller organization, the smaller country. And I love that. And I think that probably goes to the American psyche. You guys are I wish we weren't as conservative, but you're right. It's just that'd be great. I love a wild card candidate. They're always my favorite kind of thing, because you need someone to be able to see the capability there. So, and I also wonder if it ties into here, we're probably more risk averse potentially because of the IR legislation. Do you know what I mean? Whereas there's more, it's very obviously difficult to terminate someone and all that kind of stuff. Whereas it's probably a little bit different in the States. Do you know what I mean? I joke about the States being the Wild West. I call it the Wild West. So there's probably that layer to it as well.
100%. Yeah, and I'd say, there's pros and cons to both approaches, but with this relationship piece, I think, Samuels Donegan, we have an amazing network and we have such solid relationships. And so if you are a senior candidate that's kind of trying to figure out, your next step in your job search, having us as the support, I think is really helpful, because at the senior level, and I'd say even at the mid-level, those relationships really do matter. And so
very much so. And I think one of the tough things we know very much so at the moment is that, it is hard for, for senior and executive candidates to get a break into the market. A lot of them say to us, I've been told that, I'll only get a job through my networks or through an agency who can advocate for me, because, when organizations are, hiring, they'll often tap into their network first. They say it to us all the time. They'll be like, I've reached out to my network, no one's available. And that's when they're, reaching out to us. So that's great if you have a great network, but the reality is there's a lot of people outside of that network as well. So and I think using recruiters like ourselves, for your job search as well as hiring, of course, and just getting that intel, because I think there's a lot we recruit right across the market, so we always get those insights, and a lot of people want to kind of just get our 2 cents worth, and it's just it's just having knowledge and information to be able to help from that side of things. So we're going to wrap up very shortly. I think think we've got a couple of minutes to go. It always goes really, really quickly. And I want to say thank you so much to Yaz for joining me. It's great to have someone else rather than just me talking away the whole session. So we'll probably try and make it a little bit interactive. I'll bring in some other team members in the next few sessions, just so we can get some insight and everyone can get to meet everybody in the team. So just a reminder that our salary survey is available. You can go online and take part of that. That will be available until the 30th of June, and that will form part of our salary guide that we'll be releasing later in the year. The next episode of the Take will be on Friday, the 26th of June. So I will have another guest with me, and we will talk through what's happening. Hopefully we might have a little bit more clarity in terms of what's happening, and hopefully some more insights we can share in regards to heading into really basically the new financial year. So there'll be some more insights that we can share with you there. But yeah, I just want to say thank you for joining. Hope that was of value. Please keep the questions coming through and feedback. We always love to hear what's going on in your particular area and world. It helps us make sure that we're delivering the right insights back to you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.